Hey guys, how you doing today? Just sitting outside my apartment here. It's got a nice rain going on here, so I'm hiding underneath an umbrella. Got to do these recordings right before I get inside, because the second I get inside, my dog is just like losing his little mind. I'll even show you at the end of this video, I promise. He loses his little mind and then he wants to play, and there's absolutely no way I could do this video while inside. Which, you know, he's been there the whole day, so he needs to get outside and all that. Anyway, what's been banging around my head today? Big breaking story. Oh, the WE scandal. Justin Trudeau caught in yet another ethics scandal. It's almost like liberals can't stop getting caught in ethics scandals. In my view, these scandals are like they're boilerplate, right? They're the type of scandal that the media is allowed to report on, right? The media is allowed to report on a scandal where the government gives money to an organization, and then that organization gives money to the party that is currently the government in power, right? Like, that's the type of ethics scandal that the newspapers are allowed to report on. What they're not allowed to report on are ethics scandals that are real ethics scandals, right? Like attacking First Nations, unceded First Nations land. You're not allowed to report on that kind of ethics, breach of ethics. You're not allowed to report on creating green energy programs that are not green energy programs, that are complete false made up nonsense, right? You're not allowed to report on those kinds of ethics scandals. Because if you were to report on those kinds of ethics scandals, then you'd have to actually get into a conversation about how fraudulent the capitalist system we live in actually is. And the liberals, I mean, they've really revealed themselves through this COVID crisis, in my view, to be completely complicit to corporate power, right? They are willing to put money on the table, like, they have the rational sense and the basic compassion, and I do mean basic, like this is like kindergarten level compassion, to ensure that people are not starving in the street. No, I'm sorry. They're fine with people starving in the street. Like, if you've already been abandoned by capitalism, they're going to maintain that. They're not going to do anything to help you if you've already been abandoned by capitalism. But if you are going to be abandoned by capitalism because of the COVID crisis, well, that's why they created the CERB program, right? To ensure that the people who are already working for capitalism would have a little go-between before they continued working for capitalism. Because they weren't going to create a program that was going to help people who had already been abandoned by capitalism, and they weren't going to create a program that was going to help people who want to free themselves from capitalism. That's not what they're interested in. They're interested in just creating a program that maintains the human stock, as they call it, the human capital, as they call it, for their corporate owners, and to ensure that when we can get those people back to work, we'll end this CERB program, which is exactly what's going to happen, right? There's going to be millions of people. There's something like a third of the previous labor force in retail and in the service sector are still unemployed. They're just going to remain unemployed, and they will be abandoned eventually. I'm convinced of it, that there is going to come a point when the liberals are just going to be like, that's fine. We have the human stock and the human capital that we need to service us, the ruling class, and the rest of these people we can abandon to the streets, which is exactly what's going to happen. Because these liberals are revealing over and over again, like, they don't actually care about the well-being of the populace, right? Like, they care about maintaining order on behalf of the capitalist class. But eventually they'll just sell us back to the capitalists. Like, there is a point. And you can tell that's true, and you can tell who the liberals work for based on who they sent the money to. Like, sure, there's a CERB program, but twice as much money was given directly to capitalist businesses. So they're not actually that concerned with the working class. They're more concerned with their owners, right? because they're going to funnel that money to capitalist businesses, and those capitalist businesses are not going to reinvest it back in the society or anything like that. They're going to pocket it for themselves. They're going to ensure that it keeps their doors open, and they're going to ensure that capitalism moves along without a hiccup. One of the but of course, one of the interesting narratives, and I hear it all the time, I'm hearing it from customers, I'm hearing it from regular people just on the street that I'm talking to, is this idea that we're going to hit a second wave, and people are thinking that the second wave timing is going to be right over Christmas, as I've been saying this entire time. If that were to occur, like if we were forced into a position where we needed to go into lockdowns over Christmas, that could be the end of corporate capitalism. Like, capitalism requires Christmas to survive. Christmas is the preeminent capitalist holiday. It's not a Christian holiday, as much as they like to bang on about it. Like, one of the great lines, right? The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing people he didn't exist. And capitalists have taken that to heart, right? They don't treat Christmas as if it's a holiday, even though it is clearly a capitalist holiday. They still maintain this idea that it's a Christian holiday, although it clearly isn't. It's clearly a secular Christian holiday, or a secular capitalist holiday, I should say, that exists exclusively to get the consumer base to buy products. They exchange their money for goods that they attempt to replace the time they've lost with their loved ones with. That's the whole scam. That's the sham of it. That you hope that you can buy back someone's love with this token or this little doodad because you never see them. I have grandparents come into my store all the time, right? They don't really see the grandkids. They have only a very brief opportunity. And when they show up, they want to have a nice gift. So what they're doing is they're replacing the time they've lost because the kid doesn't have the time to spend with grandpa and grandma, for sure. And they've got school and then homework and then after school activities and all this kind of nonsense that we've piled on them to rob them of their childhood. And the parents certainly can't see their own parents anytime because they're working these full-time jobs that if they're working full-time, right? And if they're working part-time, then they're working several jobs. They don't have the time, right? And so when Christmas comes along, the scam that the capitalist class plays is that, well, if you don't buy something, then that means you really don't love them, right? That's the way to show your love, is with this materialist object, that you're trading your money that you've earned by selling yourself to us. And of course, you take the money that we gave you, selling yourself to us, and then you give it back to us for an item that's going to break in 2 months. And that's how this Christmas system works. And if suddenly we have to cancel Christmas, if the line goes down for Christmas, there are many companies and already there are companies shutting down on this first wave. The second wave, it could obliterate everything. And I don't think they're actually preparing for that. I don't think that these corporate capitalists care much to look beyond the next 3 months, really. I think they've got a 3-month window that they pay attention to. Because the reality is if the capitalist class has to shut all these businesses down, they don't care, right? They've got billions of dollars that they're sitting on, right? They will be fine. And in fact, for them, it's going to be a bonanza because if everybody has to shut their businesses down and if there's this wholesale destruction, then it means that assets will be cheap, right? And if you're a billionaire, you'll just pick up cheap assets, right? So they don't care. That's why they're not bothering to plan. That's why they've got no foresight. And also on top of that, they know the government will bail them out. The American government has certainly bailed them out. They're printing trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars, right? They don't care. They're not giving any of that to the working class. It's all going to the top. And the same thing is happening in Canada on a smaller scale. It's not so egregious. It's not so outrageous. What's happening in the States is outrageous. Here in Canada, the same kind of story, just on a smaller scale. The working class hasn't been so thoroughly abandoned. We did have the CERB to make it through. I still know many people who are on the CERB currently, and I hope stay on the CERB, as it's likely their jobs are not going to return. And we'll see if the Liberals are willing to actually continue assisting them, or if they're just willing to abandon them. I suspect abandonment is on the table. But again, they're funneling, for every dollar they give to the working class, they're funneling two to capitalist businesses, under the idea that, and so it's clearly the government choosing winners and losers, right? Clearly the government saying, no, we need to maintain this failed system that's designed to collapse, right? And they're going to maintain the failed system of capitalism through kind of a type of perverted socialism, that they're going to fund capitalism to keep capitalism going. They're not going to give all that extra money to the workers or to just general people in order to facilitate trade between those people. They're going to give it to these enterprises that are on the brink of closing down, because that's how their operation is designed, right? So instead of saying, okay, well, change the way you operate, right? Fix what you're doing to meet the demand of what's going on in the world. Instead of saying that, while giving the benefit to the people who make up those enterprises, they just shove the money at a billionaire and say, there you go. And the billionaire pockets it. And that's the game. And so now what's happening is they're crying about the deficit, right? As the conservative and liberal types always do, is cry about the deficit. And the deficit's like, what it is, $300 billion right now. So that's less than half of the corporate cash hoard, which is never reported on and no one ever talks about. No one ever points out that the corporations are hoarding like over $600 billion and that the personal cash hoard is over $200 billion. Nobody ever talks about that. Even the CBC, the state-run news outlets, don't bring this fact up. And it's just a hard fact that, oh, hey, there's a $300 billion deficit. Well, there's a $600 billion corporate cash hoard. So there's no problem, right? So remember that when the liberals and the conservatives raise taxes on the middle class and the poor, and cut services for the poor, that the corporations are still sitting on double the amount of the deficit. But that's the shell game, right? And it really does come down to the fact that Canadians are gullible. They're just incredibly gullible. They'll just go along with anything. Like here's a scam that the Liberals are definitely going to play, and I've been seeing and reading more in the media about it. Like, we should already have a basic income. The CERB was a basic income style program that worked, obviously worked, and really helped our society out a great deal. And it's shocking that the United States has not moved forward with something like that. And of course, a basic income is going to be completely necessary as at least a transitory state away from corporate capitalism, which is failing, right? Which is just collapsing. And we need some kind of basic income, at least as a transition away from it. Or else you're just going to have massive, like, you just look at the States. You have massive bread lines. You have massive hardship. People being evicted from their homes. It's absolutely disgusting, and it doesn't need to be the case. And but instead of that, what the Liberals are going to do is they're going to say, hey, let's do a 4-day work week. Now, that's good. Like, I mean, we'll all take a 4-day work week. I mean, we should definitely have at least a 4-day work week. Keynes, I'm blanking on that name. That's terrible. An economist from the 30s who did the New Deal. Keynes. Oh man, that's terrible. In any case, the economist that was behind the New Deal, he believed that at this point we would be working at a 2-day work week, right? That we could structure our economy so that the work was spread out amongst everybody, right? Instead of having one group that was working full-time and another group that's unemployed. And so obviously we can transition in that way. And it's something we already should have had. It's already we should have been doing. But the corporate capitalists didn't, they're sociopaths and they don't care about anyone but themselves. So of course they overwork people and steal all the money for themselves. And because that's what they do. And so the liberals will stand up and say, hey, let's do a 4-day work week, which is not really a give, right? It's just a way to split the managerial class, right? Your managers, your assistant managers, your people who are working full-time in these service and retail environments, away from the working class, right? So if you say, hey, we'll have a 4-day work week, no, we're not going to offer a basic income. Well, for the managerial class, that's great, right? Oh, 1 extra day off, that's an increase. I'm still working the majority of my time for the corporate class, and the shareholder class, but at least it's something. It's an improvement to my life, certainly. So sure, I'll vote Liberal for that. Why not? Because I don't need a basic income. My wage is good enough. Of course, the working class, these people who are working 2-3 jobs, right, who desperately need a basic income, who desperately need aid, they'll just get left out in the cold again, because who cares about them? They're replaceable. That's the way people think. That's the way the managerial class certainly thinks about the working class. So this is going to be the next scam. This is the next ethics scandal that's going to happen from the liberals. Of course, it won't be discussed that way, because the media can only discuss one very narrow, specific type of ethics scandal that does not matter at all. It's almost completely irrelevant. It affects almost no one. Like, oh no, the liberals gave some money to a charity who does charity work, they do work, and then that charity donated some money, and we're talking like $5,000, because that's how much money you can donate to a political party here in Canada, to the liberals. Oh no. And this is going to be the news cycle for the next 6 months. This is going to be the next big talking point. This is going to be something that gets brought up in the next election, for sure. They're going to have this whole thing. The blackface scandal, forgotten, right? Attacking First Nation soil, forgotten. Building pipelines, forgotten, right? The media doesn't care to report on any of that. They don't really care about those types of scandals. Because they're not allowed to report on those types of scandals. They've got to report on these extremely small scale, completely meaningless, because it's just WWE talk. It's just that kind of thing, right? It's just a way to report news and to stir a pot without really attacking anything meaningful, without bringing any systemic conversation to the table, without talking about the fraudulent nature of capitalism and how it's failing everyone. And I mean, that's completely because our media is bought and sold, right? Like, not one single media outlet here in Canada is owned by just like a small scale group. Even the Toronto Star now is owned by conservatives. So there's nowhere for anyone to go that's credible any longer. Right, the National Post is clearly leaning fascist. The Globe and Mail has always touted itself as liberal, but it's owned by the richest man in Canada. Like, he's not going to do any kind of structural analysis of capitalism. He's not going to talk about how capitalism is a fraud and how it's failed. He's not going to allow that to be printed. Now the Toronto Star is owned by, so literally the only leftist publication that exists in Canada, near as I can tell, is Now Magazine, right? Which is staggering. It should not be the case. It just shouldn't be the case. And forget about the TV, forget about the corporate-owned media there. Like, that's just nonsense. And so it's up to people like us. It's up to people to go onto YouTube and to talk. Like, just today I was listening to Jimmy Dore talk about what was going on in the States. Those guys, there are people planning protests to go to their congressmen's and their senators' houses. And I think that's exactly what we need to do. I think we need to be going to our Congress, to our representatives' houses and just blocking their driveways and protesting at their front doors. That's what we should be doing. Forget any of this nonsense. Like forget like walking up. If you're going to a protest and all you're doing is walking down a street, the wealthy don't give a crap about that. They don't give a shit about that at all, right? They're like, oh wow, lots of people care about this. I guess I should put a green logo on my thing and sell it to them. That's what that tells them. Oh, there's lots of people that care about gay rights. I guess I'll put a rainbow on my product and sell it to them. That's all they care about. If you showed up at their house and made it impossible for them to leave their house, yeah, they'd start to listen, right? So that's what we need to start doing, and that's what we need to start organizing, and that's what they're doing in the States, because things are getting to that point. And if we're not willing to do that kind of a thing, I mean, I don't know what, like, oh no, we didn't get a thing. I can't imagine why. It's because we think our politicians are actually good, or even attempting to be good. And they're just liars. They're just liars who, any presentation of goodness is just that. It's just a presentation of goodness. They're not interested in actually being good. They're not interested in doing the right thing. They're not interested in helping anyone. They're not interested in making tough decisions. They're interested in going to parties. They're interested in having extra money in their pocket. They're interested in living the good life and having you pay for it, which is exactly what we're going to do. And as this unfolds more and more, we'll just see pretty clearly, like, the liberals are cowards. They're not, they stand for nothing. They go to dinner parties with one another and clink glasses together, and the working people do not exist in their world, right? They go to Timmy's and you know, get some Tim Hortons every once in a while, and they don't know these people. They don't care to know, right? They're not interested. They don't live in that world, and they're not attempting to live in that world, and they're not attempting to rectify the inadequacies and the injustices of that world. As far as they're concerned, you can go protest and march up and down a street all day long, and you can wear what you want and wave a flag as much as you want, as long as you show up to work on time. That's what matters, right? You can say what you want, do what you want, participate in whatever you want, as long as you don't show up at my house and you show up to work on time. And that's it. So I think it's time to start showing up to these people's houses. And it's time to start organizing on that basis. Because that's the only way that we're going to actually get anything done. And that's the only way we're actually going to convince anybody of anything. Anyway, with all that said, good luck out there. I hope you're all having a fine time. I hope you're finding some stability. Yeah. Good luck.